He walked into my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, poured himself a coffee from the pot I had just made, and told me that things were going to have to change around here. He did not ask. He did not knock. He simply walked in the way he had been walking into every room of my house for the past 3 years, as though the fact that his name appeared nowhere on the deed was a technicality too small to matter. I was standing at the counter in my housecoat, the one with the faded blue stripe that I have had since my husband passed. The coffee was still hot. I had been looking forward to it all morning. I said nothing. I wrapped both hands around my mug and watched him settle into the chair by the window. My chair. The one where I sit to read the paper, where I sat every morning for 22 years while my husband and I argued about the crossword. He sat in it the way someone sits in furniture they already consider their own. Comfortable. Certain. That was the moment I understood that something had shifted, not in my house, in me. Let me go back a little, because none of this started on a Tuesday. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 67 years old. I live in Mississauga, Ontario, in the house my late husband and I bought in 1991, and I made a decision 3 years ago that I have spent a great deal of time reconsidering since. My daughter, my only child, called me in October of that year. She and her husband had been renting a place in Brampton, a 2-bedroom apartment on the 12th floor that she had never particularly loved. The lease was ending. Her husband had recently left his job, something to do with a dispute with a supervisor, she said, though I never got the full story. They needed a place to land while they sorted things out. She asked if they could stay with me. I want to be honest about this part because I have replayed it many times. She did not ask with desperation. She asked the way she has always asked for things, calm, practical, already half certain of the answer. She knew I had the space. The house is 3 bedrooms, and after my husband died, I closed the door to one of them and had not opened it again for 2 years. She knew I was lonely, though she never said so directly. She framed it as mutual. We can keep each other company, Mom. It would be good for both of us. I said yes. I want to be clear. I said yes because I love my daughter. I said yes because the house was quiet in a way that had begun to feel less like peace and more like something I had simply gotten used to. I said yes because I believed, genuinely, that it would be temporary, a few months, 6 at the outside. I did not set a timeline in writing. I did not ask for a contribution to utilities or groceries. I did not sit down with my son-in-law, a man I had always found pleasant enough at Christmas dinners and birthday lunches, though I had never truly known him, and establish any kind of understanding about what living in my home would actually mean. This is the part where some people will say that what happened next was my own doing, and I have thought about that carefully and without flinching. There is some truth to it. But I also know that the absence of a boundary is not the same as an invitation to cross one. Silence is not permission, and kindness is not the same as surrender. They moved in on a Saturday in November. My daughter brought boxes of kitchen things I had not expected. A Vitamix, 2 different kinds of cast iron pans, a rack of spices that crowded the cabinet I had used for 30 years. Her husband brought a large television that he mounted on the wall of the living room without asking, and I came home from an errand to find the artwork I had hung there, a print my husband had bought at a gallery in Quebec City, leaning against the baseboard in the hallway. I picked it up. I brought it to my bedroom. I did not say anything. That was the first time I did not say anything. It was not the last. In those early months, I told myself it was adjustment. New people in a space, everyone learning to share. I told myself my son-in-law's habit of taking over the remote, of scheduling things in my kitchen without consulting me, of treating my home the way one treats a hotel, with the assumption that someone else will handle the details, was simply his way, and that people have their ways, and that living together requires accommodation. What I did not tell myself, what I refused to acknowledge, was that accommodation was only moving in one direction. He did not work for the first 4 months. He told my daughter he was looking, that he had leads, that he was being selective because he was not willing to take just anything. I heard these conversations because the house is not large. I heard them from the kitchen while I made dinner. I heard them through the wall. I heated soup and listened and said nothing. My daughter worked. She's a project coordinator for a construction firm, and she leaves early and comes home tired. In the evenings, she seemed relieved to hand the domestic concerns of the day over to someone else. That someone, increasingly, was me. I bought the groceries. I did most of the cooking. I kept the house. I paid the mortgage, the property taxes, the hydro, the gas. I paid for the internet my son-in-law used all day, for the streaming services he added without mentioning it, for the coffee he poured freely from the pot I made each morning. I did not ask for anything in return. I told myself that is what you do for your children. What I failed to account for was that my son-in-law was not my child. He found a job eventually, about 8 months in, part-time at first, then full-time at a logistics company. I thought things might change. They did not. Or rather, what changed was his confidence. When he was unemployed, there was a deference in him. Not gratitude exactly, but a kind of restraint. He kept his feet off my coffee table. He asked before inviting people over. He said, "Please at dinner." Once he had an income, the restraint left. It happened in increments, the way these things do. He began referring to the house as home in a way that extended well past the personal. Not my home, but this home, our place, here at the house, as though the walls belonged equally to all of us by virtue of his presence in them. He bought things and left them everywhere. He made plans for the backyard, for the basement, and mentioned them as though they were already decided. And I let it go. Again and again, I let it go. My daughter seemed happy, or content at least. She was not being asked to manage the household. Her husband was more settled. The tension between them that I had noticed in that first winter had mostly smoothed over. I watched my daughter begin to relax in a way she hadn't been relaxed in years, and I told myself this was worth something. I told myself I was contributing to her stability, and that this was what mothers do. I am 67 years old, and I still believe that swallowing discomfort was the same as being generous. It was a Sunday evening in late March when everything finally cracked open. I had been watching the news. I always watch the news at 6. It is the one ritual I have kept unchanged since my husband died, a small proof that the structure of my days still belongs to me. I was in the living room, on the couch, the volume exactly where I like it. There was a segment I was following about housing costs in the GTA, something that affects me, something I had opinions about. My son-in-law came downstairs. He picked up the remote from the coffee table, not his remote, my remote, in my home, and he lowered the volume without asking. Then he lowered it again. I said I was listening to that. He said he was expecting a call and needed it quiet. I turned the volume back up. He looked at me the way he had never quite looked at me before. Something behind his eyes settled into a shape I had not seen there, something that had been building for a long time without my permission. And then he said, "You know what? Why don't you go watch TV in your room? We need the living room tonight." I am not a woman who shouts. I have never been. My husband used to say it was one of my better qualities, and also one of my more infuriating ones, because it made me very difficult to argue with. I sat with what he had said for a moment. The length of a breath, maybe two. Then I got up. I went to the front closet. I took my coat from the hook where I have hung coats for 32 years. I put it on. I picked up my purse and my keys, and I walked out my own front door. I did not slam it. I pulled it closed behind me softly, the way I always do. I sat in my car in my own driveway for several minutes. It was still light outside, that long, pale kind of March evening where the sky goes silver before it goes dark. I looked at my front garden, the one I plant every May with the same mix of perennials my husband chose our second spring in the house. The beds were still bare. It was too early in the season for anything to be growing. I drove to a Tim Hortons 2 kilometers away, and I sat in the parking lot and I drank a medium double-double, which I have not ordered in years because I have given up sugar in my coffee. I ordered it anyway. I needed the sweetness. My phone lit up. My daughter's name. I let it ring. It rang again. I answered it on the third call because she is my daughter and I could not answer. She asked where I was. Her voice had a particular texture to it. Not worried exactly, more like someone trying to get a situation under control before it became a larger problem. I recognized the texture. I had heard it before, in moments when she was managing something she would rather not name directly. I told her I was fine. I told her I had needed some air. She said, "Mom, he didn't mean it the way it sounded." And I understood in that moment with a clarity that was almost physical, the way cold air in your lungs is clarifying, that she had known what he said, that she had known what he said, that she had been in the room or had heard it, or that he had told her, and that her first instinct was not to call and say that was wrong. Her first instinct was to manage me. I told her I would talk to her tomorrow. I ended the call. I sat in that parking lot until the light finished dying and the sky went properly dark. I thought about my husband, who would have known exactly what to do and would have done it with far less internal deliberation than I require. I thought about the mortgage, which I pay myself, the deed, which has my name on it, the property tax bill that arrives every year addressed to me. I thought about 32 years of a life built carefully in those walls. I thought about the print from Quebec City, still leaning in my bedroom waiting to go back up. I drove to my friend's house on the other side of the city. She is a woman I have known since our children were in elementary school, a retired nurse with a spare room and the rare quality of knowing when to talk and when to simply make tea. I called her on the way. She had the kettle on when I arrived. I told her everything, not just Sunday evening. Everything. The 3 years of swallowed words and lowered volumes and invisible contributions. She listened without interrupting, which is a skill fewer people possess than claim to. And when I was done, she set down her mug and said, very quietly, "So what are you going to do about it?" I had not let myself ask that question yet. She handed it to me like something I had dropped without noticing. I stayed the night. In the morning, I called my daughter. She answered on the first ring, which told me she had been waiting. I told her I wanted to have a conversation that evening. Calm, direct, I would come home at 6. I asked that her husband be present. There was a pause. Then she said, "Mom, I think everyone just needs to take a breath," and I said, 6 o'clock, I'll see you both then. I spent the day making phone calls. I contacted a paralegal I had been referred to some years ago, a woman who specializes in residential property matters, a person I had never needed and had simply kept the name of in a folder in my filing cabinet, the way you keep things you hope to never use. I explained the situation. She explained my options. She was unhelpful in none of the ways that matter, and helpful in all of the ways that do. She told me that my daughter and son-in-law were what Ontario law calls licensees, not tenants. They had no lease, they paid no rent. They had entered as guests by invitation. This meant that the Residential Tenancies Act did not apply. What I needed to do, she said, was provide written notice that their license to occupy my property had been revoked and allow a reasonable period, she suggested 60 days, given the circumstances, for them to find alternative accommodation. She said no shouting required, no confrontation necessary, just a letter. I asked her to prepare it. Then I drove home. The conversation that evening was the hardest thing I have done in recent memory, including the months after my husband died, which were harder than anything I had previously known. This was harder in a different way. Death does not look at you across a kitchen table and feel personally attacked. My son-in-law, to his credit, did not shout. He was cold, which is worse. He told me that he was surprised. He told me that he had thought of this as a family arrangement. He used the word family several times in a way that seemed designed to make the document I had handed him feel like a betrayal rather than a legal notice. My daughter cried. She sat at my kitchen table and pressed her fingers against her eyes, and I watched her and felt the particular grief of a parent who loves their child and is nonetheless certain they are making the right decision. Both things can be true. They were both true. I told them that the 60 days was genuine. It was not a threat, it was a transition. I told them I would help however I could within reason. I told my daughter that nothing between us had changed. I told my son-in-law that this was my home, and that it would continue to be my home, and that I hoped very much he would find somewhere he was comfortable. He left the room. My daughter stayed. We sat together for a long time without talking. At some point I made tea. She wrapped both hands around her mug the way I wrap both hands around mine, which she has always done, which I taught her without meaning to, and for a moment the kitchen felt like it had always felt before any of this, like a room where we belonged to each other. She said, I should have said something to him that night. I said, yes. She said, I'm sorry, Mom. I told her I knew. They were gone in 43 days. My daughter found them a rental in Oakville, a 2-bedroom with in-suite laundry on a quiet street. She texted me a photo of the living room the day they moved in. It had good light. I told her so. My son-in-law did not speak to me on the day they left. He carried boxes past me in the hallway without making eye contact. I held the door open each time. I did not need him to say anything. When the last box was in the truck and the door was closed and I heard the engine start and then diminish down the street, I stood in my front hallway for a moment. The coat hooks had coats only on the left side again. Mine. My one good wool coat, my rain jacket, the light cardigan I leave there for cool evenings. I went to my bedroom and I retrieved the print from Quebec City. I found the hammer in the kitchen drawer where it has always lived. I found the small nail I had pulled from the wall 3 years before and kept in the same drawer. I carried everything to the living room and I hung the print back in its place above the couch, making sure it was level. I stepped back. It was level. I sat down in the living room. I turned on the television. I found the evening news still at 6, still there. I set the volume exactly where I like it and I did not lower it. Outside, the May light was doing what it does in Mississauga in early spring, going golden and warm along the tops of the trees, the kind of light that makes even a suburb look like it is worth staying in. The garden beds were full. I had planted them, as I do every year, with the same perennials my husband had chosen. They were beginning to come up, small, definite, unhurried. They come back every year. They do not need permission. I called my friend that evening. She answered before the second ring. I told her it was done. She said, How does it feel? I thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. I told her it felt like a house again, not the loud kind of quiet, or the lonely kind, just the kind that belongs to you, the kind that waits patiently while you remember you are allowed to take up space in it. She said, Good. I think so too. There is something I would tell anyone who finds themselves in the place I was in, not the dramatic end of it, not the letter or the paralegal or the 60 days, but the long middle part. The years of adjusting yourself to avoid inconveniencing someone who has no such instinct in your direction. I would tell them that kindness extended past the point of your own well-being is not virtue. It is a slow disappearance. And the world will not notice you disappearing. The world will simply take the space you leave. You are allowed to take it back. That is the whole of it, really. The rest is just paperwork. I keep thinking about that Tim Hortons parking lot, the silver March sky, the double-double I hadn't ordered in years, the phone ringing on the seat beside me. It is a strange thing to be sitting outside your own home in your own car, wondering how you got there. Not geographically. I knew exactly where I was. I mean, in the larger sense. How does a woman who has owned her home for 32 years end up feeling like a guest in it? The answer, I think, is that it happened the way most quiet losses happen, slowly, one small accommodation at a time. I told myself each time that I was being kind, and I was, I suppose. But there is a version of kindness that we extend not from generosity but from the fear of being seen as difficult. That was the kindness I was practicing. Not virtue, avoidance dressed in a soft voice. What my son-in-law did that Sunday evening, taking the remote, lowering the volume, telling me to go watch TV in my room as though the living room had become his by some right I had never agreed to grant, was wrong. I want to say that plainly. But I also know that I had spent 3 years teaching him, through my silence, that the cost of overstepping was nothing. He didn't invent his behavior in a vacuum. I had created a very comfortable vacuum for it to grow in. That is not self-blame. It is just cause and effect, and I find it more useful to understand it clearly than to spend energy on bitterness. What I'm proud of, and I allow myself to be proud of this, is what I did next. I did not shout. I did not collapse. I did not call my daughter back that night and beg to be reassured. I sat with the discomfort until I could think clearly, and then I found someone who knew more than I did about my own legal situation, and I listened to her, and I acted on what she told me, calmly, in writing, within the law. There is a kind of wisdom that only comes from being willing to see your situation honestly, even when the honest version is unflattering. I had to look at my own role in what had happened. That takes something. It is much easier to be purely the wronged party, but the clearer I saw things, the more precisely I could act, and the less I needed anger to fuel me. And then there is the matter of following through. My daughter cried at that kitchen table. My son-in-law went cold. Every instinct I had said, soften this, walk it back, find a way to make everyone comfortable again. That instinct has served me poorly for most of my adult life. I let it sit there without acting on it. I kept my word. They were gone in 43 days. The print from Quebec City is back on the wall. The volume on the television is where I like it. These are small things, and they are also not small things at all. I think about what I would say to someone sitting in their own version of that parking lot right now. I would not tell them what to do. I would just say, the discomfort you are feeling is information. It is telling you something true. You are allowed to receive it clearly. Think about it honestly, and then act, not from anger, not from fear, but from the quiet, steady knowledge that this is your life and you are the one responsible for it. That is the whole lesson, really. The rest is just paperwork.